Welcome to another edition of As the WNBA CBA Turns. In this episode, I think it would be titled, That Escalated Quickly, because that's where we're at. The clock is still ticking. You know, Adam Silver called it the 11th hour. I got to be honest, I'm concerned about the season being delayed, about a work stoppage, considering where we're at, but you can interpret it a couple of different ways.
That's not optimism you're hearing. That's concern. And when someone who covers this league full-time starts a video with, "I'm worried about the season being delayed," you need to pay attention. Because we're now at a point where the WNBA season starting on time is genuinely in question. The players just made their move. They put out a proposal with actual concessions on revenue share and housing. And the league's response? They called it unrealistic and claimed it would cost them $460 million over the life of the deal. Not $4 million, not $40 million, $460 million. So here's where we're at. The clock is ticking. Adam Silver himself called this the 11th hour, and neither side seems willing to budge enough to make this work.
That's kind of where we're at in this moment in time. I received a statement from the WNBA. This is the statement issued after the players' proposal. The Players Association's latest proposal remains unrealistic and would cause hundreds of millions of dollars of losses for our teams. We still need to complete 2 drafts and free agency before the start of training camp and are running out of time. We believe the WNBA's proposal would result in a huge win for current players and generations to come. And then per a source familiar, the WNBA believes the proposal from the players would result in losses of $460 million over the lifetime of the agreement.
Let's break down what the league actually said, because the language here matters. They issued a statement calling the players' proposal unrealistic and said it would cause hundreds of millions of dollars of losses for the teams. Then they added this: "We still need to complete 2 drafts and free agency before the start of training camp and are running out of time." That's not negotiating language. That's ultimatum language. That's the league saying, "We're done moving, you need to come to us." And here's the thing about that $460 million figure. Nobody outside these negotiations can verify it because the books aren't public. The WNBA doesn't release their financial data, so when they throw out a number like that, you either trust it or you don't, and the players clearly don't.
The salaries, and I've shared these before, but basically the players would go to $535,000 roughly in year 1, up from $120,000. That's the average. And the max would be like $1.3 million, up from $250,000. So a big increase in salary, but the hang up is on the revenue share side of things. Where the players, they did come down from like 31, they were at 31 or something like that on gross revenue. This latest proposal is an average of 27.5, and that's set 25% in the first year with a salary cap close to $10 million, almost twice the proposed salary cap.
Now let's look at the actual numbers on the table, because this is where the gap becomes clear. The players' latest proposal would raise the average salary to $530,000 in year 1. That's up from $120,000. The max salary would jump to $1.3 million, up from $250,000. Those are massive increases, life-changing money for most of these players. But here's the problem. That's not where the real fight is happening. The battle isn't over salaries anymore. It's over revenue share. And specifically, it's over whether that share is calculated on gross revenue or net revenue. The players came down from 31% to an average of 27.5% of gross revenue. That would mean 25% in the first year with a salary cap close to $10 million, almost twice what the league is proposing.
For net revenue, the league is offering, I believe, like 70% of net revenue, which is roughly 15% of gross revenue. So in gross revenue means the revenue before expenses, the league argues. The expenses come first and then the revenue goes out. And that's where we're at. That's where we're at with things. And, you know, I think we're facing a couple of realities here. You know, the players quickly spread the message that they made concessions in the deal. And when you first see that, you go, okay, there's movement. That's a positive sign. But then when the league responds as strongly and with the speed that it did, you do get concerned that there's...
Here's where this gets complicated. The league is offering roughly 70% of net revenue, which works out to about 15% of gross revenue. So what's the difference? Gross revenue is everything that comes in before expenses. Net revenue is what's left after you pay for everything. Arena costs, travel, staff salaries, marketing. The player's argument is equally straightforward. We're not responsible for how you run your business. We should get our share of the total revenue, and you figure out how to make the expenses work. And that's the stalemate. Because those two positions are fundamentally incompatible. One side has to move significantly, or there's no deal.
The stalemate's going to continue, and if the stalemate continues, then the season gets pushed back. I don't know what the drop dead date is, but we are in days to weeks, certainly not months, and probably not a month, right? You're in that realm, in that range, more or less, because the expansion drafts do need to happen. Free agency needs to happen, and the draft is in April with the season set to start May 8th. And the players move, their pull, their card would be a strike. Here's the bottom line of the whole thing, right?
So let's talk about what happens next, because the timeline here is brutal. The expansion draft needs to happen. Free agency needs to happen. The WNBA draft is scheduled for April. The season is supposed to start May 8th. And we're sitting here with no CBA in place and the two sides still billions of dollars apart over the life of the agreement. The players do have one card left to play, a strike. They could refuse to play until they get a deal they're willing to accept. But here's the reality check on that strategy.
I don't believe the WNBA's deal is going to get materially better. Whatever you believe or however you would argue about the revenue share, what you feel is just or correct, or if the books are correct, I don't believe the WNBA's deal is going to get materially better. Maybe a little bit, but not materially better. I think we're close to the final version. So the question then is, do the players move further, or do they take this all the way? And then the question on the second part of that is, in taking it all the way, do they gain an advantage? Is it a principled stance, or one that brings in the results that they are seeking? And I don't know if the latter is actually going to be.
Think about the position the players are actually in right now. Yes, they have leverage from the Caitlin Clark effect and the ratings surge. Yes, the league just had its best season ever. Yes, there's genuine momentum behind women's basketball, but strikes are expensive. Players don't get paid when they don't play. And while some of these players are making good money in Unrivaled or overseas, a lot of them aren't. A lot of them are counting on that WNBA paycheck to cover their expenses for the year. Missing even a month of the season would hurt. Missing 2 months could be devastating for players who aren't stars. And the longer a work stoppage lasts, the more it damages the momentum the league just built. Casual fans who just discovered the WNBA because of Clark, they're not going to wait around through a labor dispute. They'll move on.
The case or not, as Breanna Stewart also put it, when you're in a revenue share model, this will be a revenue share model of sorts. If there is no revenue, then you can't share it. So these are all the questions that need to be answered. Now, my hope, the pessimistic side of me says, they're too far apart, right? The players said they made a concession, but they're way off the number that the league is going to accept. I even think 20% is probably on the high end of it. So there's that aspect of it.
Here's what's particularly frustrating about this whole situation. The league had opportunities to avoid this. When the players submitted their initial proposal months ago, the WNBA didn't respond for weeks. They felt the proposal was so far from reality that it didn't deserve a serious response. And maybe that's true from a pure negotiating standpoint, but it gave the players a rallying cry. Now the players can point to that silence and say, look, they wouldn't even talk to us. They ignored us for weeks. How are we supposed to negotiate in good faith when they won't engage? That's leverage in the court of public opinion, even if it doesn't change the underlying economics. And public opinion matters when you're trying to build a fan base.
Then there is the optimistic side where at least something happened. Like they put a proposal out, the league responded. Can we get these two parties in a room in the next week or so, lock the door, and say, figure this out? Because it is urgency time, as it's been said. And if you want to argue that the league made a mistake in this process, it would be not responding to that player's proposal for so long. Even though they felt it was immaterially different from the previous one, it didn't deserve to be responded to in that sense. It has given the players a bit of leverage to rally around. to say, they didn't respond to us. Look, they didn't respond to us. How are we supposed to react? And then there's the reality of the situation, which is, the players.
Let's be clear about something. The players are going to get significantly more money, no matter what happens. Even the league's proposal represents a massive increase in compensation. The average salary more than doubles. The max salary quintuples. Housing allowances improve. Travel conditions improve. The overall package is substantially better than what exists now. But that's not how negotiations work. The question isn't whether the new deal is better than the old deal. The question is whether the players can extract more by holding firm or whether they're better off taking what's on the table now. And here's the uncomfortable truth. The league probably isn't going to move much more from where they are right now.
Are going to get a lot more money. They don't get paid when they don't play. There's a lot of players, who aren't in Unrivaled or Project B or whatever, who, missing that paycheck could sting, and it could hurt the league, and it could hurt the league going forward. It could hurt the future revenue share if there's a work stoppage. All of those, all of the above, right? So it remains to be, I'm hopeful that they get together in a room in the next week or so, that this does provide for that. I mean, Nneka Ogwumike had said with Jemele Hill and Carrie Champion, she expected an agreement in the next couple of weeks. She's, of course, the president of the Players Association, but it doesn't feel as if
Nneka Ogwumike, the president of the Players Association, told Jemele Hill and Carrie Champion that she expected an agreement within a couple of weeks. That was optimistic then, and it looks even more optimistic now, after the league's response. Because when you read that league statement again, there's no wiggle room in it. Unrealistic. Hundreds of millions in losses. Running out of time. That's not the language of a side preparing to make concessions. That's the language of a side preparing to issue a take-it-or-leave-it offer. And when that offer hits the table, probably within the next week or two, the players are going to have to make a decision. Do we accept this and play, or do we strike and hope we can force a better deal?
The WNBA is moving much from its position. So when does the take-it-or-leave-it offer hit the table? I got to imagine soon. And we will see if the players take it or leave it at that point, and if the season indeed starts on time or not. So more of, I guess, the same, if you will. The glass half empty, they're still far apart. The glass half full, at least there's a back and forth, that can lead to more rapid moves between the next round of negotiating or however it plays out. But as the WNBA themselves now said, time is running out. And usually in these sort of situations, it is the powers that be who are more comfortable waiting things out.
Here's what makes this situation so precarious. In labor negotiations, it's usually the side with more resources that can afford to wait things out. And in this case, that's clearly the league. The NBA owns the WNBA. They've subsidized it for decades. They can afford a work stoppage if they have to. It would be embarrassing, sure. It would damage the momentum they've built, but they could survive it financially. The players? Not so much. Most of them need that paycheck. Most of them can't afford to sit out months of the season on principle. And the longer a strike lasts, the more it hurts the players who can least afford it. That's the leverage imbalance that makes this so difficult. The players have public opinion and momentum on their side, but the league has the financial resources to outlast them if it comes to that. So the question becomes, is this a fight the players can actually win? Or are they better off taking the substantial gains that are already on the table and living to fight another day? Let me walk you through why this matters, beyond just this negotiation. Because what happens here sets the precedent for how the WNBA operates for the next 8 years minimum. If the players accept a deal based on net revenue at 15% of gross, they're essentially accepting that the league's business expenses come before player compensation. That means if the league decides to spend heavily on marketing or expansion or new initiatives, that comes out before the players see their share. The players have no control over those decisions, but they bear the financial consequences of them. On the other hand, if the players hold out for gross revenue share at 27%, they're asking the league to guarantee them a percentage of every dollar that comes in, regardless of expenses. That's a fundamentally different business model. It means the league has to make their expenses work around the player compensation, not the other way around. Now here's where the NBA comparison becomes relevant. NBA players get roughly 50% of basketball-related income, which is calculated on gross revenue. So the WNBA players can point to that and say, why should our calculation be different? Why should we accept net revenue when NBA players get gross revenue? The league's answer is straightforward, because the WNBA isn't profitable yet. The NBA is a mature, profitable league that generates billions in revenue. The WNBA is still building, and you can't split profits that don't exist. Both arguments have merit. The players are right that they deserve a fair share of the revenue they help generate. The league is right that you can't pay out money you don't have, and that's why we're stuck. Think about what the players actually proposed in this latest offer. They came down from 31% to 27.5%. That's a concession, but it's not a big enough concession to bridge the gap. The league is at 15%. Even if they move up to 17 or 18%, you're still looking at a 10-point gap. That's not a rounding error. That's hundreds of millions of dollars over the life of the deal. So when the league calls the proposal unrealistic, they're not being dramatic. From their perspective, the math genuinely doesn't work. They're looking at their projections for revenue growth, their fixed costs, their expansion plans, and they're saying, we cannot make these numbers work at 27% gross revenue. The players, meanwhile, are looking at the Caitlin Clark effect. They're looking at sold-out arenas. They're looking at record television ratings. They're looking at merchandise flying off shelves. And they're saying, the revenue is there, you just don't want to share it fairly. Here's what's particularly tricky about this moment. Both sides might be right. The WNBA probably did have its best financial year ever in 2024. The revenue growth was real, but revenue growth doesn't automatically mean profitability. You can grow your revenue by 30% and still lose money if your expenses grew by 40%. And that's the information gap that makes this so hard to resolve. The players don't have access to the books. They don't know what the actual profit margins are, or if there even are profit margins. They're being asked to trust the league's numbers, and after years of feeling underpaid and undervalued, that trust isn't there. The league, for their part, isn't willing to open the books completely. They've shared some financial information in negotiations, but not everything. And they'd argue they don't have to. It's their business. They make the investment decisions. The players are employees, not partners. But that's exactly what the players are pushing back against. They don't want to be treated as just employees anymore. They want to be treated as partners in building this league. And partners get transparency. Partners get a real voice in business decisions. Partners get a fair share of the upside when things go well. Watch what happens over the next 2 weeks, because that's probably the window we're looking at. The league is going to put a final offer on the table. It'll be better than their current position, but not dramatically better. Maybe they move from 15% to 18% of gross revenue. Maybe they add some sweeteners on housing or travel, but the core structure won't change significantly. And then the players have to decide, is that enough? Is 18% of gross revenue plus improved conditions enough to accept? Or do we hold out for more and risk delaying the season? Here's my read on where this is headed. I don't think the players strike. I think they take a deal that's somewhere between the league's current offer and their latest proposal, probably around 17 to 19% of gross revenue with some face-saving wins on other issues. Why? Because the alternative is too risky. A strike damages the momentum the league just built. It costs players money they can't afford to lose. It gives casual fans a reason to tune out, and there's no guarantee it actually results in a better deal. The league knows this. That's why they're comfortable playing hardball right now. They believe the players will ultimately accept a reasonable offer rather than risk everything on a strike. And they're probably right. But here's what concerns me about that outcome. It means the players lose leverage for the next negotiation too. If the league learns they can wait the players out and force them to accept less than they wanted, they'll do it again in 8 years. The pattern gets established. So maybe the players decide this is the moment to make a stand. Maybe they decide that building long-term leverage is worth short-term pain. Maybe they strike for a month, take the financial hit, and force the league to move closer to their position. That would be the principled play. That would be the play that sets them up better for future negotiations. But it would also be incredibly risky, because if the strike drags on, if the season gets canceled, if the momentum dies, the players might end up with less than what's on the table right now. Adam Silver called this the 11th hour. He's not wrong. We're in the final days before decisions have to be made. The expansion draft can't wait forever. Free agency can't wait forever. The regular draft is in April. At some point very soon, someone has to blink. My guess? The league blinks just enough to give the players a face-saving win, and the players accept it rather than risk everything. We get a deal that's better than the current CBA, but worse than what the players wanted. Both sides claim victory, and we move on. But if I'm wrong, If the players decide to hold the line and the league refuses to move, then we're looking at a delayed season at minimum, and possibly a significant work stoppage. And that would be devastating for a league that just had the best year in its history. So that's where we are. Two sides still far apart, a deadline approaching fast, and a decision that will shape the WNBA for the next decade. The players made their move with this latest proposal. The league responded by calling it unrealistic. Now we wait to see who moves next and whether they move enough to avoid a crisis. What do you think happens here? Do the players have enough leverage to force a better deal? Or should they take what's on the table and bank the massive salary increases? Drop your prediction in the comments, because we're about to find out which side read this situation correctly.